Hi everyone.
Hello folks.
We're continuing in the chapter An Appealing Promise, Unfulfilled in Ray's book, In Search of Christian Freedom. The subtitle here is Loving Friendship. He begins by quoting Proverbs 17:17. A true companion is loving all the time, and is a brother that is born for when there is distress. And then Ray begins, we remember the claim that only in the spiritual paradise among Jehovah's Witnesses can we find the self-sacrificing love Jesus said would identify his true disciples. Anyone observing or mingling with Jehovah's Witnesses gathered at a Kingdom Hall, before and after a meeting, or at one of their large assemblies would bear testimony to a sense of camaraderie and unity and apparent happiness among them. The question is whether this is of itself the true test of the claims made, particularly of the depth of these feelings.
Is that sense genuinely unique, distinctively different from the sense of camaraderie, unity, and apparent happiness one can see in the gatherings of many other affiliations, not only among those of a particular religious affiliation, but even among those united in some social cause? Since witnesses are virtually prohibited from being present at any such gatherings other than their own, they have no other standard than themselves by which to judge. This can only call to mind these words of Paul: for we do not dare to class ourselves among some or compare ourselves with some who recommend themselves, that is, according to Phillips, write their own testimonies. Certainly they, in measuring themselves by themselves and comparing themselves with themselves, have no understanding. That text is 2 Corinthians 10 verse 12.
The value of a good and loyal friend is beyond measure. One would think that in a spiritual paradise, such friendships would flourish. As in any religious community, friendships do develop among Jehovah's Witnesses, some of them close ones. I had a number of close friendships during my years of association, and a considerable portion of those persons are still my friends, for they held similar values, and those values generally led eventually to their own disengagement from the witness organization. But I also have come to realize how conditional most friendships within the witness community are. This is not primarily the fault of the people, for they are, by and large, like people anywhere. It is instead the effect of the system on their attitudes and relationship.
In reality, mere acceptance within the community is completely conditional. As we have seen, the April 1, 1986 issue of the Watchtower states, on page 31, quote, approved association with Jehovah's Witnesses requires accepting the entire range of the true teachings of the Bible, including those scriptural beliefs that are unique to Jehovah's Witnesses, end of quote. Acceptance of the true teachings of the Bible does not go far enough. It must be extended by the additional qualification of those scriptural beliefs that are unique to Jehovah's Witnesses. While claiming to be distinct from religions holding to a creed, one often hoary with centuries of age, the witness organization has its own creed, even if certain of its elements may be as new as yesterday. The term creed itself is avoided and is simply replaced by expressions such as the, quote, grand body of truth that Jehovah has built up among his united people over the past 100 years, end of quote, or the, quote, pattern of the pure language that Jehovah has so graciously taught his people over the past century, unquote. And those are from the Watchtower, August 15, 1981, page 28.
But such terminology only produces a distinction without a difference, for a creed claims to be just that, an officially outlined body of fundamental beliefs, to be accepted as divine truth by those adopting the creed. Any claimed difference with other religions in this respect disappears under examination. The creed may change. What was once taught may be rejected, perhaps later be reinstated. But whatever the creed is at the time must be completely embraced, or one faces rejection as an approved associate. In the spiritual paradise, any friendship is therefore predicated upon that condition.
He has an extensive footnote on this issue of unique teachings. The phrase again is teachings or scriptural beliefs that are unique to Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, Ray wants to look at that more closely, and he says, actually, many of the beliefs listed in the Watchtower material are by no means unique to Jehovah's Witnesses. Seventh-day Adventists, the Worldwide Church of God, and others also believe in the nearness of Armageddon and the millennial reign of Christ, the establishment of an earthwide paradise. These beliefs, and yet others of those claimed to as unique, are to be found in the several Bible student groups, such as the Dawn Fellowship, the Layman's Home Missionary Movement, and in such religions as the Church of God of the Abrahamic Faith, and two other churches of God with centers in Illinois and Oregon. Most of these have origins going back into the 1800s. Belief in Christ, having had a pre-human existence and being subordinate to the Father, is by no means unique to Jehovah's Witnesses. The only truly unique beliefs among those the Watchtower article lists are those which would identify the faithful and discreet slave as associated with the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses. Even the date 1914 is given importance in some of the religious groups mentioned, and it is only the particular application which the Watchtower Society now gives to that date which is unique.
What struck me with that footnote, though, is that most of these groups, well, I mean, he says they're dating back to the 1800s, so most of these groups are not mainline Christian denominations. They're all newer religions, newer sects and cults.
Yeah.
So to compare yourself to other cults, you have some similar beliefs, but
They're not unique, though, to the Watchtower. They're held by other breakaway groups from the Watchtower that he lists here, but also groups that came before the Watchtower, specifically the date 1914.
yeah,
And the idea of Christ not being God and being pre-existing, but not being God.
And I mean, their claim is that somehow they have reintroduced, truth that was lost to the rest of
Yeah.
the groups.
But what they all have in common, the listed groups that I know of, are that they are what the Christian denominations would call cults or cultic. Even Seventh-day Adventists there's a dispute as to whether they can be accurately called a cult because of their other distinctives, including leading on a particular person, and that tends to be a characteristic of a cultic group. But they're all New Light religions, including this one that most of us haven't heard of, the Church of God of the Abrahamic Faith, which is an organization connected to the Christadelphians, actually anteceding the Watchtower. So I guess the question that pops out at me at the end of this is, have Jehovah's Witnesses spoken this pure language they brag about for over 100 years? Well, if you know anything about their history, you realize that language kept changing, discarding and adding to, and then sometimes reinstating.
Right.
So how can you possibly call it a pure language? But then you have to compare it with Christendom, which has now 1,500 years of creedal consistency and continuity. So we wanted to link for you a part of the Paradise Lost series that we did on Zephaniah, because this is where they get their concept of the pure language from. It's interesting that we've just recorded some 3 Worlds Nelson Barber Russell videos going all the way back to, of course, that book, which came out in 1877, and even then they were boasting about having fulfilled Zephaniah, that their faith had been purified compared to the creeds of Christendom. But of course all of it came to nothing in 1914. So I'll put that one up, the analysis of Zephaniah, because it's just one of the Old Testament texts the Watchtower uses to accredit itself, stolen from Israel. And also 5 characteristics of cultic groups. That set of videos is also linked on the screen.